Politicians, journalists, entrepreneurs. Tonight we have squeezed them all into one show, and we're not letting them go home until they tell us the future of St. Louis. I'm Casey Nolan, and we hope you'll stay tuned.
Tonight we've got what you need to know for 2014. On Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
J-Bomb, I say STL 2014, you say?
Cautious optimism.
Okay, very good. Jason Rosenbaum, now from St. Louis Public Radio, back on the show, joining us tonight. Thank you very much. Start us off here. Tell us what else is in your crystal ball for our region. And I want to be clear, when we say St. Louis tonight, let's just make this a blanket statement like the beginning of a contract. Heretofore, St. Louis, in most respects, will mean the region, unless otherwise specified. So this is not a city-only conversation. But when I say St. Louis 2014, what else are you seeing in the future?
Well, St. Louis obviously has a lot of challenges with crime, poverty, and frantic competition with other similar-sized cities, but it also has a lot going for it. We have a thriving entrepreneurial spirit that can be seen in T-Rex and a lot of startups in and around the Danforth Plant Science Center. We have new retail establishments that were announced, I guess, on the tail end of 2013, like IKEA, which will probably have a groundbreaking with an opening in 2015, as well as a Whole Foods, which I think is coming to the Central West End. And with the overall economy seeming to be on the uptick, I think St. Louis will kind of follow with the rest of the national economy, and you may see economic opportunity kind of come in with an economic upturn, so to speak.
So those are pointing to larger, those are indicators of larger trends, do you think? I mean, for instance, the IKEA in Midtown clearly doesn't just tell us the state of the economy in Midtown St. Louis.
Well, I think it's a big deal because, if anybody has been to a Chicago suburban IKEA, I can tell you that when you walk in there, you leave with $600 or $700 out of your pocket. I know this for a fact that just happened to me. And I think because there are several states surrounding St. Louis that don't have an IKEA, it is going to become a regional destination. And honestly, I don't think St. Louis knows what they're getting into. They're going to get some very inexpensive furniture.
And some confusing instructions.
The instructions are pretty self-explanatory if you have an Allen wrench.
We'll agree to disagree there. Something that got a lot of coverage at the tail end of last year, Boeing was the wooing of Boeing, as I like to say.
Or Bombardier Part 2, as I like to call it.
Fair, I like that as well. But what it hasn't gotten much coverage is we didn't get it. What does that say about anything?
Well, I mean, the reason we didn't get it was because of an unusual labor revote that kind of happened, and we don't have time to get into that. We have much more
in Seattle, where the jobs are now going to stay.
I don't know really what to glean from that. I mean, some people are trying to draw larger conclusions about that, but I think in reality, it was a low-risk, high-reward venture that, if Missouri at least made an attempt, they really didn't have much to lose except maybe the couple $100,000 they had with the special session. It's possible that Boeing could look at Missouri and St. Louis more favorably, especially when it comes to defense projects, because they made this effort. So we'll have to see if that pans out in 2014 as well.
Did they show their hand at all in Jefferson City that, oh my gosh, they can actually get along and maybe do something productive?
Well, the reason I had that awkward Bombardier Part 2 is because this has happened before in 2008 when the Missouri legislature was trying to woo Bombardier to Kansas City. There was all sorts of bipartisan agreement there. There was a package that was passed. Everybody was really sure it was going to happen, and it didn't. And I think there was a little bit more skepticism and cautious optimism, to bring me back to that word, about Boeing in this instance, but the result was pretty much the same. Hence, Bombardier, Part deux.
Part deux. That's the number 2 in French.
I hope I'm saying that right. I took
fine.
Spanish.
That's good. Très bien. Okay, a couple other things we'll probably hear tonight. City, county, the conversation that's still out there, whether the city should re-enter the county, what's in it for both sides. Also, a lot of things. The legislative session just opened yesterday,
Yes.
and I know that's something that you cover. Okay, before we move on, though, I want to explain a little bit more about your role, because the last time you were here, you were with the Beacon. Now you're with St. Louis Public Radio.
And the Beacon.
Give us to the 10-second version of that.
Well, the St. Louis Beacon and St. Louis Public Radio are now one entity, and it's gone great so far. I finally have an office after 3 years of working from home. Thank you, St. Louis Public Radio, for that.
I hope your membership is up to date. All right.
is.
Okay, well, we appreciate Jason. Jason's going to be here with us throughout the night, and we also want you here with us throughout the night using, as always, the hashtag StayTunedSTL. We've got our social media experts over in our green room with our guests that will be coming out throughout the night. But before we continue to look forward, let's take a look back tonight at some of the issues we talked about in 2013, because we have a feeling we're going to be talking about them again tonight.
In St. Louis, 2013 produced successful startups, a Supreme Court ruling on schools, and a history-making mayor, with the Honorable Francis Slay winning a first-ever 4th term. And on Stay Tuned, we talked about all of it. And we debated the future and challenged the present around the issue of how we get around in the region.
When you get out of your car, you start to interact with people.
The question is, how do you pay for it?
MoDOT has largely been a road and bridge organization, and we are learning.
There will not be success around transit in the region if we don't shift our paradigm.
Also in 2013, St. Louis gained fame as one of the nation's top tech cities, and the local movers and shakers of invention and investment told us why.
So it's a renaissance. There is more activity in St. Louis than I've ever seen.
A dollar goes 3 times further in building a company than it does in Silicon Valley.
So we see today way more talent stay in St. Louis and becoming part of the ecosystem.
Making headlines, students from unaccredited districts now have the right to transfer to neighboring districts, with their home districts forced to foot the bill. Going beyond the headlines, the guest of Stay Tuned.
Leaving children in failing districts should not ever be an option.
Who am I gonna hang out with like on the first day? And like I'm a freshman in a new high school in like whole new district.
In education, we have one of the most backward policies where we take resources from schools as punishment. Why did we let these districts fail? Why did we as a society, why did we as a region let these districts fail?
The decision to stay or go may become more complicated. Lawmakers and school leaders could rewrite the transfer law early this year. And are we really better together? Is the possibility of the city and the county becoming one still on the table?
This is not a silo. The city doesn't sit by itself.
Yes, we're 8 counties or however many counties. Yes, we're this many communities, but altogether, we are one St. Louis region.
Also, we know we're not building Boeing's new planes, but we are building an IKEA. Tonight, we're asking the question, what else does 2014 have in store for St. Louis?
Okay, so on Stay Tuned, we'd like to talk to journalists, civic leaders, community leaders, politicians, and tonight we thought we'd have them all around one table. Let me do some introductions first, starting back at the table. You know him from last time, you love him, you hate him, you're not sure. Jason Rosenbaum, thanks for coming over. Also, Rena Hajat Carroll, Diversity and Awareness Partnership, thanks for being here tonight. Welcome back to the show, Joe Wilson, now with Better Together. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And Scott Ogilvie, also welcome back to the show, Alderman with the 24th Ward. Let's just kind of pick up where Jason and I were talking about, for instance, IKEA, some of the things that have been in the news. Just in this neighborhood kind of that we're in now, we've got several things being built. Is that an indication or give you any optimism about 2014?
Yeah, well, I mean, something I was talking about before is how, as a region, I think we probably should be a little more optimistic. I was talking with another guest, and we sort of coined a phrase, civic self-confidence. And I think we have the opportunity probably to express that more often in the coming years. As far as development goes, there is a ton of development happening through the Central Corridor in St. Louis right now, from downtown to Midtown, the Central West End, around Forest Park.
Let's take a few of those off, because we've got the IKEA that I think has gotten a lot of publicity.
Have we mentioned that yet?
We have mentioned the IKEA.
Are you getting an IKEA?
I'll tell you about it later. But also there are some high-rise apartment structures. We've got a Whole Foods is going to have some apartments on top.
Yeah, and those really the housing I think is long-term. That's what's really critical is we're building new housing. We're going to have a more diversified housing stock. The market, and this is really market-driven housing, there's a lot of demand both for condos and rental units through the Central Corridor. And you know, developers now post-recession can get the financing and are pretty eager to build these things because they're profitable. You know, that's a vote of confidence in St. Louis. And that additional population that we'll get out of that, you know, I think there's a lot of benefits to be had there. The paradigm, maybe we'll talk about this later, but the paradigm for the sort of the residential neighborhoods of North St. Louis and South St. Louis is slightly different. Probably has more to do with education. But Central Corridor news, there's a lot of momentum there, and I think it's basically all positive.
So, Rena, if the boat is rising in the Central Corridor, is it rising for everyone?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I would say it is certainly beneficial for Central West End and our students. So if we talk about retention, which is I think a huge issue for this coming year, yes, you know, absolutely students and young professionals are excited about IKEA. They're excited about Whole Foods. Are you excited?
I am.
So I think this is evidence, right? So, but if we talk about, you know, deep north, deep south, I think this is where we still have our diversity issues to consider.
Well, yeah, I've said, I think a couple weeks ago, that while there's a lot of great things going on in St. Louis, it's still a divided city. I mean, and it's not even just north-south. There are parts of southeast St. Louis that have just as many problems with poverty and crime as the north side. I don't know if this Central Corridor development is kind of going to reach over into the north side, but one thing that will happen this year is the opening of the Mississippi River Bridge, which could naturally bring a lot of development to North St. Louis just because there's going to be a high demand of cars going through that area. And you know, just the opening of this bridge, which has been years in the making, I think as far as just symbolically could be another source of civic pride for the region.
Civic self-confidence.
Yes, civic self-confidence.
Is that something that's happening? There's some skepticism already on Twitter tonight about whether what we're talking about when we keep beating the IKEA drum really means anything for anyone in North County, North City. Is there something happening there that can also be a source of civic self-confidence?
Paul McKee's North Side stuff is probably still just raising a lot of questions. There's still a lot of people who are very concerned about what's going to happen up there and whether things will actually happen up there. So I think that's probably, there's still some questions up there, and I don't know, civic self-confidence might be a little ways away on that front.
I think, you know, the reason why you know, a construction project or a company like IKEA is important, you know, they have a high profile that is going to be new tax revenue for the city. And when you get to, you know, what do people in North and South St. Louis care most about? I think it's more basic services, it's city services, it's educational opportunities. And when you have a more stable tax base, it does make it easier to put more attention on those sort of more basic things. And, you know, the city has, you know, in some ways, the city has done a terrific job with its budget over the years, despite, you know, a declining population. We have a good credit rating, and we've continued to provide, I think, quality services. But, you know, definitely new economic activity, which these Central Corridor projects represent, will help us continue to do that and hopefully do it, I think, better in the future.
Something that definitely is close to home for folks in North St. Louis County is the issue of school transfers. Where do we stand with that in terms of how that impacts the community? How does the state of Normandy and Riverview Gardens, our two unaccredited schools that are transferring students to other communities right now, how much is that weighing on folks in North County?
Well, I think it should be a wake-up call, especially for people in St. Louis City. I heard Alderman Ogilvie on the radio a few weeks ago talking about how, you know, St. Louis City is kind of teetering on the edge of unaccreditation, and if the status quo reigns through with this law, then I think you could see a pretty substantial flow of students away from the city into the county schools. And if there's nothing to stop the capacity issue, I think it's going to make Riverview and Normandy look tame by comparison. So that's going to be, we'll probably talk about that later in the legislative session, but I think that is kind of the ticking time bomb in that particular situation, at least for the city.
Let me rephrase the question and say maybe what would you like to see, and not even just on that issue. Take the reins off of this conversation. What would you like to see in 2014 for St. Louis region?
I mean, from my perspective, and particularly in this education conversation, it's equal value for students of color, for students who have lower SES levels, and that's something that I think we're not doing a good job around. We are very clear about who we value and how we value them, and that's playing out with this Normandy issue we just saw yesterday, Normandy going bankrupt, and I think this is sort of reflective of how our region has been, and I think there's some opportunity to be a little more inclusive and really start addressing diversity head on instead of having it this notion. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
Will we have a city-county robust and legitimate conversation over re-entering the county for St. Louis City?
I really hope we have a robust conversation. I really would like to hear what people in St. Louis City and St. Louis County and all the municipalities have to say about how we all work together to get things done across the entire region. Better Together is really not trying to push for re-entry or the nuclear option, full merger, unification, all that stuff.
Really?
It's a 501c3. They can't do it.
Well, okay, I will tell you.
We really aren't.
Well, another group thinks otherwise in that they have formed to oppose it. And I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just saying that might be indicative of how this conversation will go.
I understand. I'm very happy that people care enough to organize to do anything. Because I think for a very long time, it was very easy to say, well, someone will take care of something in my community. Someone will take care of this. That's for someone else's, that's someone else's responsibility to take care of this. But it's good to take a microscope to these things every now and then and see, what is my little community doing? What is my, I grew up in unincorporated South St. Louis County. There was stuff going on with South Point trying to incorporate and Green Park incorporating. I watched St. George disincorporate. It's very weird how portions of the community operate. And we should take a microscope to these things. We should look at these things, and there should be a degree of transparency that I don't know that it's been there for a long time.
Okay, we'll stop it there for now, but I'd like you all to stick around and come back towards the end of the show. Next, we're actually going to leave the studio via Google Hangout. We're talking technology, something else we've heard a lot about in St. Louis recently. But first, we want to hear more from you. Hashtag Stay Tuned STL. Let's take a look at Twitter now. If the website dice.com kind of rings a bell and you think you heard it somewhere, well, it was this past year when dice.com crowned St. Louis a tech job hub, an up-and-coming city when it comes to tech jobs. Joining us now from New York City, Jennifer Bewley with dice.com. She's here to help us kind of figure out exactly what that was all about. First of all, Jennifer, tell us, what is dice.com and what did it say about St. Louis? Okay, Jennifer, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because this takes us back to one of our very first shows when the Gremlins got in the technology, and somehow you were just now lip syncing to a song I would know if I was more current on pop music. So I'm just taking a tap dance timeout to see if we can get that fixed. And we may have to just take a break and come back to you. The shot looks great. We just got to get somehow to get the music out of there. All right, hang with us, Jennifer. We appreciate your time. We'll be right back to talk to you from dice.com. Let's take a break and figure that out for a second. sorry, I can't. Okay, Jennifer Bewley from Dice.com. Let's try it again. I apologize for the technical difficulties to everyone at home as well. What is Dice.com, and what did it say about St. Louis?
Sure. So Dice is actually a career site that's geared specifically for technology professionals. So they use us to find opportunities and to manage their career, and employers use us to find those technology professionals for their open positions. So we really sit in the middle of the employment situation. And so we were able to name St. Louis the fastest growing city for tech jobs last year, because what we saw on the site was employers were posting more jobs, substantially more jobs in 2013 than they were in 2012, and it ranked best in the country. So technology jobs for St. Louis was up 20 to 25% year over year on Dice.
Of course, percentages can mean a lot of different things. Was it still a significant? Can you help us maybe put it into context what we're talking about here? I mean,
absolutely.
1 to 2 is a 100% increase.
So on any given day, you'll find about 1,000 jobs looking for technology professionals in St. Louis. So the growth of 20 to 25% was substantial.
And how does that compare to other cities kind of our size? It obviously, are we out in the front of the pack by a lot, or is it kind of neck and neck with other parts of the country?
You were definitely on the lead. Charlotte was another city that was close. In the Midwest, Detroit was at 10%. But to think about it from a size perspective, you know, Cleveland on any given day on Dice would have something like 600 jobs advertised, whereas St. Louis has 1,000. Indianapolis is somewhere around 400. So you're really making a substantial investment in technology and technology professionals that's really paying off in terms of the job market.
Any characteristics that you're hearing from either employers or job seekers? Why St. Louis?
Well, you have an incredibly skilled workforce, and it's only getting bigger. So Missouri in general, sort of Missouri-based universities, have been actually graduating more computer and information sciences professionals in the last couple of years. So the workforce is expanding. It's well-skilled, and the community is doing a lot of right things to really encourage startups and to encourage people to follow technology. So for instance, there's a not-for-profit in St. Louis that really helps startups. It goes by an acronym, ITEN.
I-10.
And you know, they will help startups understand, or technology startups understand funding. They will help them with a talent acquisition strategy. They will set them up with mentors. So there's a lot that the community is doing, from education to businesses itself, that is really, you know, blossoming in St. Louis.
What, I guess that might be time for me to ask, just so we're clear, what qualifies as a tech job? When you say there's 1,000 of those, what does that encompass?
That is a very broad definition, and it's a variety of different people. I think if you think about technology professionals, the unemployment rate in the U.S. right now for those professionals is 3.3%, but it's even lower in certain professions. So software developers, mobile developers, web developers, you'll even see a tighter employment market for those professionals. Anytime you're closer to the application that a client would see or a customer would see, the demand there is even stronger. It goes all the way back to the database professionals, so people who are working behind the scenes to make sure that data is being harnessed and being used in a way that gives businesses an edge. Data scientists, another very hot profession right now that's in technology. And then it goes all the way up to sort of the lesser skilled positions, which would be a help desk person or a desktop support person who really keeps the plumbing of various companies running.
Is this a growth that you're seeing across the country? Is everyone experiencing some growth in this area?
You know, it's a really good market for technology professionals across the country. St. Louis is just a little bit better in terms of what we're seeing today. And it's actually continued in 2014. So I think you'll see continued growth in 2014 for St. Louis.
So are we gunning for the next Silicon Valley here, the Silicon Prairie or Silicon Midwest or whatever? Or do we even want to be? I don't know. Is that a totally different ballgame?
Well, you know, I hope so. I mean, technology is really an investment in your future. I mean, there's never been a time in my career where it hasn't gotten more technologically advanced. So the car I drive today has a lot more lines of code in it than it did when I was 16 years old. And so you're going to continue to see that progression. And so it's really an investment in the future. And, you know, it's an incredibly well-paid position. You know, you were talking earlier about IKEA and T-Rex and, you know, everything. These are $75,000 to $80,000 a year jobs in St. Louis. And so you're really making an investment in your economy.
And expand on that, if you would, because I got to believe there's a benefit that you see beyond just the individuals who are cashing those checks for the jobs they find through Dice or whatever service.
Absolutely. I mean, engineers tend to cluster together. So more engineers will beget more engineers. So you'll start to see sort of a blossoming or a momentum in the way the economy is developing. And so from my perspective, you know, I said earlier that it's an investment in the future, and that's true. And so as you have more engineers, you know, they will have kids and kids around them that will then be interested in what they do, and having someone, regardless of access. So there's lots of ways to learn about technology today online for free through services like Code Academy, where kids can develop their own website. All of that, again, is just an investment in the future. So there is more to it than just the paycheck today.
Last question, do you see something, do you hear back from those people what they want to see in a community, where they are looking to relocate, where they would like to live?
Absolutely. I mean, so companies will actually come to us and say, you know, we're considering opening an office in these 5 cities. Which one is the best? Which one has the most available talent? Which one has the talent that matches what we need? And so, you know, having more graduates that are coming is important. Attracting more businesses that have IT professionals involved in them, which is proliferating, is important. And all of that, again, it's sort of momentum. Momentum gets success. The trend is your friend. Right now, St. Louis is doing a lot of good things to attract technology professionals.
Jennifer Bewley from Dice.com, thank you so much. Thanks for the nice write-up, and thanks for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Casey.
Let's go back to social media. Katie or Nate may be more qualified to interview John on this particular subject, but John Paul from Grain Inc., welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Congratulations are in order.
Yes.
You're a first-time new father.
Yes.
As of how many days, or should we say hours?
48 hours, maybe.
Congratulations. Healthy baby.
Healthy baby boy.
Do you have a name picked out?
Yes, Blaze.
Blaze.
Blaze
Wow.
Robert Pa.
There's a lot of pressure to be John Pa's son, I feel like, and Blaze is a good start. I think that's starting on the cool. Okay, Nate Johnson, welcome back, Real Estate Solutions. Also, Katie Jambretz, welcome back, St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. Can I just ask you guys to look into your crystal ball? Besides a healthy, young, cool 1-year-old, what else do you see happening in the year 2014 for the St. Louis region? Maybe bouncing off a little bit of what we just heard there with the tech jobs that she sees continuing.
I see more tech jobs. Yeah. I mean, one of the announcements that you know, kind of got buried in all the Boeing news was that we made the Boeing shortlist. We were one of a handful of cities that were on finalists for the 777X, which was an incredibly small group of municipalities, but also.
And what does that? Let's stop you there for a second. What does that say? I mean, people thought we just got played, so Seattle could they could get a better deal in Seattle.
Not true at all. I mean, we were on their short list. They were here. They had a huge team of the core top people from Boeing here looking at the land, at the universities, at the neighborhoods. They were taking on a tour of all of our cultural amenities a whole day long. And that was just one of 3 visits that they were going to be here on the ground. So I think, you know, when you hear Jason Rosenbaum talk, does it mean future defense projects? I think it lines us up very well for future defense projects. But I think it makes us look incredibly good to all manufacturers in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. I think that that's kind of the theme of what I expect in 2014 is that St. Louis is going to continue to be highlighted on the map as a place for different things to go. And with the Boeing opportunity, it did just that. It showed that we could work collaboratively as a state and certainly as a region to, hey, raise our hands and say, hey, we want this project. Do we believe that Boeing is going to do something else huge in the next decade? Probably so. Are there other manufacturing companies that have those opportunities? That are they CEOs talking to each other? Are these people saying, hey, you know what, maybe look at St. Louis? And, you know, hopefully we'll see that how we responded to this opportunity will help us get successes down the road.
And remind us, there are some Boeing jobs that are coming here.
And one of the other announcements was that they're bringing 400 new engineering jobs to Boeing. That's on top of the hundreds of IT jobs they announced this summer. So, I mean, we're getting 800 to 1,000 new jobs at Boeing. These are research and development, engineers, IT. These are incredible jobs that attract people to the region, but also kind of frame us out as being a place where really smart people want to be.
We've talked about, we're not going to use the I word anymore when it comes to development over here, but if people drive up and down 40, they see a lot of construction, they see a lot going on. It may seem like an inconvenience with the ramps and whatnot, but what's going on over there in the Cortex world? Are things moving there?
Well, it's interesting that IKEA chose to be at Cortex, which is the innovation district. Yeah. Why? They said, well, Cortex is innovative and sustainable, but more than that, it's going to have foot traffic. I mean, it's going to be mixed use and retail and residential. And to put an IKEA there, suddenly you're going to drive down Forest Park Parkway and there will be people everywhere. It's going to totally shift the way Forest Park Parkway looks.
You'll find me there. Oh, yeah, absolutely. IKEA. Well, I mean, one thing is that you guys are both in property and real estate. And the reason I'm not really talking beforehand is because I don't disagree with you guys. If I was to disagree with you, I'd probably be saying more fierce things. But one thing I think I do see in 2014 is property prices rising, especially in the city. And I'm hugely, even the past 5 years, I've been saying I'm hugely optimistic about St. Louis because, especially in the city, I think it's completely undervalued. The IKEA itself, like I'm sure SLU is like just celebrating because their property values must be going up. They will be if they're not already. And I see the huge opportunity of restaurateurs opening up new restaurants because, I mean, 5 years ago, even before then, the restaurants they're okay, but there aren't as many like that we have now. I mean, you have Small Batch opening up, you have the Bailey's restaurants, you have Niche and Gerard. I mean, you have all these different aspects where you see St. Louis really rising. And we're not getting enough attention about it.
Yeah, and if you look at, I think that what an attraction like IKEA come into town, it does like what Scott mentioned, it increases our civic self-confidence. I know that when we were in competition with other opportunities here in St. Louis, when we heard that Kansas City got Google Fiber, for instance, there seemed to be some air letting out of the sails of St. Louis. Like, why didn't that come to St. Louis? And I think that when you get these sort of chic type of brands that come to our market and aren't in all other markets, it's like, hey, wow, look at that. They're coming to St. Louis. That's great. And when you look at the real estate development, the residential development that's taking place, I mean, we're bringing on a huge amount of residential real estate within our region here. If you look at, the Whole Foods, between the Whole Foods and the new Opus development that'll be coming in, we're talking about almost 500 residential units right there. And then if we look at the Loop and we look at the Washington University development, we're talking about another 250. The Loop Trolley Project, which is going to get off the ground this year. We're going to see ground broken in 2014 for that. That's going to expand development further east on Delmar. There's so many opportunities there when you look on both sides of Delmar.
And isn't momentum one of those things that once it gets rolling, it's almost unstoppable? And don't you feel like 2014, it's like we've got the momentum, like what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
I personally, I mean, that's a great question because one of the things I think St. Louis does lack is a cohesive vision. I feel like everybody's siloed out. Right, you have partnership, you have real estate developers, everybody's kind of, but I think when you have massive amount of growth in a city or change in a city for good is when people really start communicating together and start working together. Whether that means the county and the city come together, I don't know, but I do think that people that have positions of power need to let go of some of that power and work together in order to create something even better.
And see, I think we're seeing that. And I think, Katie, with your organization, with the partnership, I mean, that's exactly what we need. I don't think that anybody expects or should expect for the city and county to all of a sudden merge, or we don't even know if that's the best solution, but I think that what we're seeing is maybe some baby steps. Let's get in, let's work together on these things.
Well,
let's
work economic development work. So we haven't even been around for a year yet, and we've had some of our biggest, huge corporate expansions, Monsanto, Boeing, Express Scripts, Worldwide Technology, and an explosion in tech entrepreneurship. So we've seen a really big successful first year. So what's next? Is it combining, cooperating on things like public safety? I think you hear a lot of conversation around that. Like, hey, economic development worked. What else could we try to do together to make it work better?
I hate to stop it, but we got to keep going. The legislative session, as you all know, started yesterday. So coming up, we are talking politics. I'd like you all to stick around because we're going to get a little more of this conversation in at the end of the show. But we'll be right back after a short break. Okay, we've stayed at the table, but we've switched the participants to talk politics. Back at the table, Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio, also formerly and still the Beacon, but St. Louis Public Radio.
Right, we're combined.
Combined, I'm sorry. I asked Jason to explain
better
it.
together.
Better
Yes.
together. Now,
That's
you're
right.
taking a side on that issue? Is that what you're hearing?
I am.
Okay, anyway,
Yes.
moving on. Joe Mannies, thanks for being here, Joe,
Yeah,
once
well,
again.
thanks for asking me.
And Scott Ogilvie, Alderman 24th Ward, back at the table. Yesterday, the legislative session began. What have they got done so far?
Well, they just started, and I think what they've done is set the table. Both parties and many of the people in and outside the Capitol have been talking about what they want to discuss and what they don't want to discuss, what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So there's a lot of topics out there, but in the next month or two, that'll get narrowed down to what legitimately can be done.
So what can be done? On my home base over at KSDK today, we heard the Speaker of the House and another gentleman from the labor side talking about right to work. That's already in the news in one day. Are we going to see some movement on the right to work issue?
No, we're not, and here's why. Not to poo-poo on Speaker Jones right there, but it's going to have a hard time getting out of the Senate. Even if it gets out of the House, it'll
Why?
face an all-hands-on-deck filibuster.
The Republicans control the Senate.
But, well, here's the deal. Jones is doing it in part for political reasons. He's likely to run for statewide office in 2016. He's trying to really solidify his support among fellow conservatives. The general conventional wisdom among many Republicans who I've talked to is that it may very well get a House vote. It may even get through the House. Then, as Jason is correct, it'll then get killed in the Senate because you have, in the Senate, you can still filibuster to death, whether you're, even if you are outnumbered. Plus, you've got some Republicans who really don't want to do this. There are many businesses in the St. Louis area who have unions, who have had these long-standing relationships, and they've worked out how things will operate, using Boeing as an example. So they're not necessarily keen on this. You've got Missouri Chamber, which is sort of for it, but there's other issues that they want to push as well. So Jones, this is in part political, to make a statement that he can do this, and then whatever happens in the Senate, happens in the Senate, and he still looks good.
Let's talk about the county race. Charlie Dooley will be challenged this year in the Democratic primary. I'll put you on the spot. You're
taking me out of my comfort zone.
Well, I was just going to say, we'll get you your outside analysis as a city man. What do you see going on there with one of your fellow Democrats?
He's actually an independent.
I apologize.
He's not a Democrat yet.
Right, Dooley, for the time being. Dooley versus Stenger, I think, it's...
This is a councilman who will be challenging in the primary for the county executive.
I think we're still a long way out. I think that probably winds up being a relatively close primary, and right now it's way too soon to predict what happens. The labor groups kind of early going towards Stenger is important because they do a lot of groundwork on campaigns, and they have existing networks, and they show up and vote. So that is a significant factor so far. On the other hand, I mean, Dooley has won some tough elections before. He has his own network, and I think what's more interesting to me right now in that race, beyond who's running, is the question of campaign finance reform, because Charlie Dooley is one of the folks who's been the recipient of some big donations by Rex Sinquefield, who seems to be sort of always, the last couple of years, dominating the political conversation in St. Louis and Missouri. There's a lot of talk, and it may just end up being talk, at the state level about going back to a system of limits on contributions. We are way far out of the norm, the state is now, with no limits on contributions, no limits on lobbyist gifts, no limits on who can lobby. Legislatures going into the lobbying ranks after they exit the state legislature. So it would be, that's a case where, I would love to see those two match up in an environment where you couldn't get a $250,000 campaign contribution to one of them.
Any chance that's going to happen?
And that's a county race, too. Any chance that's going to happen? Well, possibly in St. Louis City if your bill manages to get through, because he's sponsored a bill to actually limit donations for city officials. But as far as state officials, I just don't really see the cards kind of shuffling in that way just because Republicans are so dominant in the legislature. I will say we had Jason Kander, Secretary of State, on our podcast recently, and he is going to be pushing for ethics reform, limits to campaign contributions, limits to lobbyist gifts and whatnot. Whether that pushing leads to anything, I think remains to be seen.
Well, there's a couple things that I wanted to mention. First, as far as campaign donations, one of the major things, and Jason's written about this too, is that it's not just Republicans who aren't too keen on campaign donation limits. Attorney General Chris Koster, who's a Democrat and the likely Democratic nominee for governor in 2016, is not for campaign donation limits. So if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, if Koster gets elected governor, chances are it's not going to happen for the next 8 years unless there's some sort of compromise on some sort of deal. But beyond that, if you look at what's going on in St. Louis County, while Dooley has gotten some major contributions, Stenger actually has gotten a string of large contributions from labor the last couple months. And labor has lined up behind Stenger, but there may be some splintering off going back to Dooley. The key wild card, there's two wild cards there. The first is County Prosecutor Bob McCullough, who endorsed Stenger early. He's probably the most prominent, powerful figure in the county among Democrats, and behind the scenes, it's how active he gets in the primary between Stenger and Dooley that may play a role. The other thing is the Republicans so far have not come up with a major candidate. They have one candidate, but they don't have anybody major. And from what I'm hearing from the Republicans, they probably won't.
Okay, we'll leave it there because we have to transition to another topic that actually started out really in 2012 with the Supreme Court upholding the Affordable Care Act, but it certainly made a lot of news in 2013. Let's once again take a look back to better take a look forward.
I would not be able to get into the exchange, and I would be without health care.
They can't be a good consumer and pick the right MRI or the right doctor to go to without the information.
Healthcare is scary. You go into your doctor's office, and if you don't know the things that they're mentioning, you don't know the drugs they want you to take, you don't know the diseases they're naming, that can be really terrifying.
We are not going to be able to have the traditional model of Marcus Welby, one doctor per person. We've got to open it up.
Believe me, we really need to do something about Medicaid expansion, because what we didn't do in Missouri last year is huge.
When they formed the Affordable Care Act, the idea was that states were going to expand Medicaid, and so that would take up the coverage for these people that couldn't afford it.
So everyone that lives in poverty in Missouri is still uninsured.
Okay, back to the show once again is Tara Kulash from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, whose beat we've discussed a couple of times is the Affordable Care Act. Maybe you can just do a quick review with us. What were some milestones in 2013 for the Affordable Care Act? We had the marketplaces.
Right.
What else was dominating your columns?
Sure. The fact that Medicaid didn't expand was a pretty big deal in Missouri. There's a lot of Republicans that are against it, but the governor, Nixon, was really pushing for it, and he's pushing for it again. But it's looking like Republicans really don't want to put it on their list of priorities right now. So.
You know, there were other things. I recall a time when it was even illegal for state officials, public officials to even talk about the exchanges. Yeah. Can you give us a review of anything else that came up this past year?
Sure. Well, the glitchy website has been an issue, and what's happening now is that some insurers aren't finding people in their system. So the federal government's saying that's only happening with like 13,000 people. It's not that big of a deal. But if you're someone with a pre-existing condition and your insurance isn't coming through, it's a pretty big deal.
And Missouri had a easier time, harder time than most states when it came to navigating the exchanges.
Most states had a hard time. That's really how it goes. I mean, even states that had their own exchanges had a really hard time. Look at Oregon, they are doing awful.
That's what I was getting at, because at one time we thought having your own exchange, and that was something we did not do here. Any chance that Medicaid will be expanded? That was a pretty big part of this law.
In the short term, no. For the very reasons that she stated. The Republicans controlling the legislature are not keen on this. Now, the Missouri Chamber has come out and says that they're going to be more aggressive this year in pushing for it because of the money that's involved. You've got the governor and many in the business community who are saying, look, we're sending $2 billion a year that could be coming here to other states. because we didn't expand Medicaid. Plus you have, depending on the estimates, up to 300,000 Missourians who don't qualify for the subsidies on the exchange because they don't make enough, but they should be on Medicaid, but because we didn't expand it, they're not there. So they're in this hole. And so there will be a push for that, but chances are not much. There'll be talk about it, but there won't be action.
And I've said this before, but since 2005, when Republicans made steep cuts to the Medicaid program, if you look at the trajectory of how many House seats they gained and lost since then, they have supermajorities now, even though there's been efforts to expand Medicaid many years, even before the Affordable Care Act.
I got to interrupt, Jason, because I think it's so important to take it out of politics and just talk about, the human toll of this. Medicaid expansion sounds like kind of a technical thing, maybe. The fact is, Missouri has some of the strictest income limits for people to qualify for Medicaid, and it means we have literally tens of thousands of Missourians who don't have access to health care because they make too much money to get Medicaid, but they don't make enough money to buy their own health insurance, or they're not employed by somebody who offers health insurance. So you have, we've talked a lot about, if you're a minimum wage worker or somebody making $10, $11, $12 an hour, you probably don't have your own health insurance. And that means there's so many people who are just not getting basic health care in Missouri because our Medicaid limits are so strict.
And let's let me cut you off there. We'll save it. We have a minute. And at the end of the show, we can get back to this.
Okay.
I promise.
All right.
I promise, because we have to talk about rural hospitals is on the list. We have to talk about school transfers. But first, let's see what you're doing with hashtag Stay Tuned STL. Well, as far as headlines went in 2013, this is a big one. You may be even bigger in 2014. School transfers and what it means to our region, what it means specifically to some families in North St. Louis County, West St. Louis County, South St. Louis County, potentially the city someday. This is Dale Singer back on the show from now St. Louis Public Radio, still the St. Louis Beacon. Where do we stand now with transfers?
Well, we stand pretty much where we did before. With the beginning of the legislative session, a lot of people have ideas about how the law might change, but education laws in Jefferson City don't change a lot because people like to do a lot of different things to them, and sometimes with everything that's added to them, there's always something that people don't like and they'll vote against it.
But this isn't a hypothetical, this isn't just a philosophical debate, there's a sense of urgency from Normandy and Riverview Gardens, is there not?
Oh, sure, and ever since those transfers started in the fall, everybody's kind of sat up and taken notice about a law that was around for 20 years. There have been a lot of different legislators, there have been a lot of different education groups that have made suggestions about what might happen. There are a few things that people agree about. Most people say receiving districts ought to have some sort of say in how many students they can accept. To help the sending districts, people say there should be a limit on how much tuition the receiving districts can charge. Almost everybody who's put forth an opinion have said, well, let's not just accredit districts, let's accredit individual schools. That way, if a district has 20 schools and 10 are accredited and 10 are not, we wouldn't have to send kids so far away to have them go to a good school. They could just transfer to an accredited school in their own district. Those are three areas that a lot of people are agreeing on. Beyond that, there are a lot of different approaches that people have suggested that may or may not find a majority in Jefferson City.
And I say urgent because Normandy has said it will go bankrupt.
Right. The superintendent in Normandy was in Jefferson City actually again this week to make his case that they don't get enough money. They may not make it much past spring break. The State Board of Education has suggested that the state make a one-time appropriation of $6.8 million to help them make it to the end of the school year, but that's not met with an awful lot of enthusiasm from a lot of lawmakers, so it's very unclear whether that's even going to happen.
Not to sound pessimistic, but if that happens, if they can't keep their doors open, what is that ripple effect?
Well, the ripple effect they've already felt it. This is what happened with Wellston a few years ago. When Wellston shut down, all the students from Wellston went to Normandy, which at that time was only provisionally accredited, and some people, even people in Normandy, have said that kind of pushed them over the line into unaccredited territory. So if the Normandy district goes under, and that includes Normandy and the former Wellston students, I presume that means those students would be dispersed to surrounding North County districts. What effect that's going to have on their academic accreditation, it's hard to tell.
We're out of time, but one last yes or no question. Is this an urgent issue in Jefferson City?
It is because it's not only St. Louis County and right around here, Kansas City is also unaccredited, so I think there's going to be some attention there. And with more rigorous school standards, a lot of rural districts face the same possible fate.
Thanks, Dale. We'll talk about this more next week on Stay Tuned. But for now, we're going to take the best part, some have said, of the show, which is the post show, put it in the show. Stick around. We'll be right back. Suddenly, I just, for like a minute, flashed back to like a cage match when I watched wrestling as a child. So like it is a free-for-all. The goal is to not eliminate all but one. However, you do have license to talk outside of your quote-unquote area of expertise. Is that fair? Those are the only rules, I feel like.
Thank you, Casey, for letting us be out of our areas of expertise.
Yeah, because if anything, if the one thing we need is more airtime for Jason, I just feel like he hasn't been on enough tonight.
Maybe next week you can bring ego is exploding.
Does the first person who says IKEA win anything?
Whoa, I like that. No, the first thing we have to say, I think I promised, is rural hospitals. Yeah. Why is that important? And make it interesting for everyone.
Okay.
We're not.
Because in most rural counties in Missouri, this may not be entertaining, but it's
I say that as a rural boy.
Hospitals and school districts are probably the largest employers these days in rural Missouri. If rural hospitals start closing, and I've been saying this for a while, which some have threatened to do because of the lack of Medicaid expansion, because many of the people who would qualify for Medicaid are in rural Missouri. And they're showing up at hospitals still, and if the hospitals aren't getting the federal payments that they used to get paid for covering uninsured, and then they have to close, then the discussion in Jefferson City will change.
About expanding Medicaid.
That is the one issue that I think could prompt a total change in what happens, is if these rural hospitals start closing, even if it's just one or two, then the Republican legislators in the rural areas will really start looking at this from a different perspective.
And there's no question, as Alderman Olugby said, there is a real human impact here because of this Medicaid gap, as he mentioned. There'll be real people who won't be able to get health insurance because of this decision. But what I was going at with my wordy statement before was that there has to be outward pressure among these legislators for them to change course. And I guess we'll see in 2014 whether this issue really resonates with people and they go to the polls and maybe they change the composition of the legislature. So.
Well, Medicaid, though, is the one issue that really is national as well as state. And this is the one issue where the national fight over the Affordable Care Act actually could affect what happens in Missouri. This is one of the few issues where it's the publicity over the problems with the website and other things begin to continue to take hold in Missouri and turn the public solidly against it, then things won't change. But again, how the national debate plays out, whether the U.S. Senate changes parties, that kind of stuff actually can have an impact in what happens with Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act in Missouri. It's one of those rare issues.
The big question, and this is what maybe we won't get clarity on this in 2014, but the question is Missouri as a state government going to do anything or nothing? Are we going to be a Mississippi or a Louisiana, states that collect no taxes and provide essentially no services to their residents? Or are we going to be a state like Minnesota or Washington that collects a moderate amount of taxes and does things like provide decent schools, decent public transportation options in cities, and healthcare for residents? That's really the question. And Missouri is like 44th or 45th in terms of tax burden in the United States. I think the urban areas, St. Louis and Kansas City, are ready to go in another direction and say, state, it's okay if you collect a little bit more taxes, because the people who live in these cities over and over again are asking for better services from the state. People are not saying, do less. They're saying, please.
What about the infrastructure?
I'll give Katie the last word as the music starts to play.
Well, think about the infrastructure. Have we invested to get people to the places around town they need to go? We spend very little compared to other regions on that. So in the next 20 years, what's that going to look like?
This conversation is not going to stop, just so you know at home. We're going to keep talking online. What I want to know, I'll put you on the spot just a little bit here. This is an issue that gets politically charged, but when we're talking about Cortex, when we're talking about people coming in from outside of the region, is this a conversation that they're involved in? Are they interested in this Medicaid expansion?
Real close look at what that community is all about. If they're going to ask their employees to live there and make that their home community.
It's not just a gut decision. There's some analytics that goes into this.
Right.
On Twitter, we were hearing that people actually like it when we jump around on topics. So I'll pass it around. Since I'm looking at you, Rena, I'll ask you what else you wish we would have talked about tonight that maybe we didn't, or what else is on your mind for 2014 St. Louis, and we are on the web, by the way.
I am excited about leadership changes. So I think in 2013 we had an interesting change in leadership with some of our nonprofits, Mike McMillan, or the Urban League, Orvin Kimbrough, United Way, and so I'm wondering if that's going to forecast for 2014 and ahead. So I think there's something to be looking for in terms of new, younger, just different changes in our leadership.
Joe, you've been quiet.
Actually, I have to agree with her. Like watching people like Scott and Jason Kander, who both of you guys are, I think you're doing a good job. I think you're doing really well. And if Jason's watching, I think he is too. But I'd love to see them step up and be more vocal and prod the people in power a little bit more and do it publicly, so that all the residents of not just the city of St. Louis, but also people all across the state of Missouri can kind of look at their elected officials and say, yeah, we do deserve better. We should be doing better than this. Why aren't we? You're our leaders. You are our leaders. Why aren't we doing better? Because it's partially their responsibility.
It is our government, not just something that we rail on and talk bad about. Yes. We are the government. It's not a political statement. I'm just asking if that's what you meant. Right. Joe, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I think one thing that we didn't mention, and there was a time, was the initiative petitions.
I had that written down.
2014, because there's really hardly any body running, it's going to be about the issues running.
Unless you're paying attention to the license collector race.
So you're saying, like, for instance, could right to work be for the voters to decide?
Potentially. I think that's less likely than there probably maybe something about income taxes. There definitely will be something about teacher tenure, probably, because Rex Sinquefield is funding this campaign to put that on the ballot. There may be something about early voting, which actually Koster is involved in.
Transportation tax?
Yeah, there'd be the transportation tax. There's some minor, some major. There's also the ethics proposals, and it's going to depend on who gets the money to actually fund some of this stuff, but it's boiling down to there may be 5 or 6 where they actually get people out there and try to get enough signatures to get them on the ballot. My point being is that if you've got a contest, elections in August and November where really, except for maybe 1 or 2 races, it's going to be issues. It's not going to be, it's going to be 1 or 2 races. That's it.
John, how are you spelling Blaise?
B-L-A-I-S-E.
I like that.
That is a Blaise Pascal.
Very nice.
Not with a Z.
No Z. He might get that as a nickname. You never know. Maybe that's on his jersey.
When you think about the future of your child in St. Louis and Missouri, do you think?
Let's talk about this.
Do you think, man, that kid's future will be so much better if we are a right-to-work state and we take away tenure from high school teachers, Or do you think, you know what, my kid's future in this state is probably going to be better off if we do things like fund infrastructure, fund education, and get away from this attitude where, like, you know, big money donors completely dominate the political agenda in Missouri, or we listen to sort of the things that people seem to care most about? Not to lead you to an answer.
Well, I think St. Louis's future is very bright. As long as as long as a certain silo group, for example, in power, that would be political or economic or some other group, doesn't just screw it up royally, meaning that they really want to they want to put people in pain. Like, I don't think anybody's like
some
that.
sort of ideological.
I don't know, maybe there's a coup. I don't know.
Okay, fine.
Right, something really radical,
Right.
bad, which I don't think is going to happen. I see a bright future for St. Louis. I think everybody wants it to be better for the most part. So whether or not it's going to be funded through big donors or if it's going to be, I personally grew up in St. Louis. I had a great education, and I moved to other cities, and I felt like I was very competitive with anybody else. I don't know what the answer is to that, to tell you the truth. So I will say this, is that I like competition. I like to see people struggle for something better, and I think that struggle has to be there. So people want to just kind of sit back, fat and happy. That's one of the best states that's doing great right now is Texas. I don't know how they do it with no state income tax. I really don't understand them.
Immigration. It's a big part of it. It's honestly a big part of it. We're trying to figure out, why don't we get as many new citizens as other regions do? Texas has grown in a large part because they get so many new citizens. And why don't we get as many? Could we get more? If we just said we wanted people to move here, would it help move the needle?
And we've got to look at education too. I know we touched on that a little bit earlier, but that's a decision that you're going to have to make in a few years. You know, where are my kids going to go to school? And one of the challenges that we've got as a region is that we've got so much, we've got so much dissension from one municipality to the next, from one school district to the next, as far as the quality of education that someone can get. And if you look at the public schools and some of the better public schools that we have in our region, they tend to be in the more expensive areas of town. So it creates a huge disenfranchisement within several segments of the community because they don't have access to a real quality education in all circumstances. And when people decide where they want to live, when they're looking at real estate decisions, they've got to look at that. So it's a perpetual thing that happens because if I can afford to live in a neighborhood that has a great school system, then I'm going to do that. And as a result, the area that maybe I would have lived in otherwise, had the schools been a touch better, is going to suffer because I'm not there.
That's a great point, because we talk a lot about young people moving into the city of St. Louis. It's a great thing, and I don't know if we've taken a census of whether that is, has risen, but I think anecdotally you see a lot of young people live there. But when these young people start having children and they have to make the decision about education, I do wonder 5-10 years from now, is St. Louis public school going to be an option? Charter schools, private schools, all those types of things.
What are you going to do, Jason? You got a little one on the way. John, you're a city resident too, and you've got a little one now.
I mean, ideally,
I would still be in South City 5-10 years from now.
Well, we have a 30-year mortgage on our house, so I would hope.
Fair enough.
I would hope. I don't know at this point. I would hope we're in a position to send our kid to St. Louis public school. I mean, I went to a public school, albeit a public school in a wealthy area, so it was probably more stable than an urban environment. But I mean, I think when people move into a city, they want to be part of the public school system, and it's diversity and challenges as well.
I mean, the issue, my husband and I are young professionals. We live in the city of St. Louis. We want to go to the St. Louis public schools. I have a 3.5-year-old. We're 71 on the wait list for our first school, St. Louis public school. That is ridiculous. So we don't even have true access to the St. Louis public schools as it exists right now. So it is this question of what do we do? And are we going to stay in the city? That would be our preference. But if we are 71 on the wait list, what's the likelihood that my child is going to get into Kennard in August?
It's just a lot of uncertainty, but a hopeful uncertainty.
That's really what's so ironic about all this emphasis on transfers. I mean, it's not that you want to be able to go somewhere else to get a good school. It would be a lot more efficient for everybody to have a good school in the neighborhood. And not only that, the good schools in the neighborhood help make the neighborhood better. So it's the emphasis. You know, people say, well, gee, this law is working fine. Why should we change the law to give people the option to move out of a bad school to go to a good school? Well, the emphasis should be turned on its head. Why don't we make the emphasis on making the bad school the good school, as opposed to giving the children the option to move somewhere else? Obviously, it's not that simple, but if you put the emphasis on where it could be there, that would not only help the education, it would help the communities.
I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I mean, all I know is this, is that I know that there are other small business owners who keep their businesses in the city, not because it's cheaper, but because we believe in it. Really, it could be cheaper for me to build my business someplace else. And I know I have a small business, people have larger businesses, but they're still small businesses that keep them in the city when they know they could be in Clayton and be cheaper. And so, but it's because we have the long view. I really don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years. Personally, it probably won't change that much. 10 years? Well, maybe we'll actually see some major differences. 20 years, I think we're going to have a great city and system.
So I'm putting you down for the, help me with the math, Jason, that would be the
2034.
2034
recap.
Do you want to do 2034 recap or
I can't make that promise.
Can you do 2033 review?
If I'm alive, I'll think about it.
Okay, it's one of the two. We'll
That's cautious optimism right there.
And we have come full circle. On that note, we will call it a night.
Self-confidence.
Jason, that was great. That was a great way to tie it up. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.